The Leafs will have to move forward without Mitch Marner. How long will we be out? Tough to say, but we'll discuss the impact of his injury and a couple of other injury notes from practice as Leafs go back to the city of brotherly love to take on the Flyers. This is the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your daily things for all things Leafs. I'm your host, David Morassutti from Sportsnet. As you can tell, Mike is not with me this week. He is away on vacation. That means I am bringing in some backup. Frank, my good friend Frank Stanisci is joining me for today's episode. Just a reminder everyone that Locked On Leafs is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast. So make sure you subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, make sure you go and subscribe to us on YouTube, Locked On Leafs, as we continue our push for 5,000 subscribers. We're almost at 7,800. We're getting there. We're inching away close to that 5,000 mark. So make sure you please go over and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. And I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKDOWNNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Frank, thank you again for, as always, friend of the show, always willing to jump in and help me when I'm by myself. So I'm glad that I was able to catch you this week. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's been an interesting week. The hockey's been interesting as well.
It has been really interesting. So we know that the Leafs were, the schedule has been weird. I kind of discussed this on the last episode where they went in that run of playing 4 games in 6 nights, had 4 days off. They played, they get back onto the ice. They play against Philly. They play against Carolina. And now they got 2 straight sets of back-to-backs with obviously starting tonight with the Flyers, and they play the Washington Capitals this week, and then they have the Oilers on their schedule, and they also have again the Carolina Hurricanes. So the Leafs are going to be seeing a lot of opponents multiple times in a stretch here, which is very, very, very interesting, very unusual, I would say. But we do know that the Leafs, as they head over to Philadelphia, the lineup's still going to be missing a few players. We got a little bit of an update on Mitch Marner. The update is that he is not skating. He is not coming on the trip. You shouldn't be surprised to see that because, as Sheldon Keefe said, he hasn't bounced back the way they expected. Pretty much, he skated, didn't feel great. They're really having a hard time with that ankle sprain. Look, ankle sprains are tough. That's why sometimes when you sprain it,
it's worse.
It could be a short-term thing or it can be a long-term thing. It's really, really hard to judge. And look, I mean, the reason why he was able to play the rest of that game is because he didn't take his skate off. If he had taken his skate off, tried to put it back on after he initially sprained it, he wasn't coming back in that game when he sprained it. So basically right now, the update on Mitch Marner is don't expect him maybe even for the rest of the week at this rate. Maybe he gets into a practice later in the week if the rehab and whatever he does in Toronto works out for him. But that's a tough loss for Leafs. We discussed it, the power play hasn't been looking so great. He plays a big part in that. The penalty kill hasn't looked very good. He's a big part of that. This is where Mitch Marner makes the money that, when we talk about his importance to the team, it's not just that 5-on-5. It is those extra things he does on the special teams is where they miss him.
And his ability to make, life a little miserable for the defense of the opposition. And by defense, I mean forwards, defensemen, and goaltender.
Yeah, I mean, he does a lot of different things that there aren't many players like Mitch Marner on the Leafs. Let's be honest here. There's not many that have the playmaking ability that he does, the shiftiness. The skill is apparent with Marner, and they do miss that. So here's the hoping that he can get back and healthy. And look, getting a little bit of time off for him, I don't think is the worst thing. He plays a lot, so he can be, when he is back, he can be refreshed. But the issue is an injury like this, he's not skating, so it's going to take him more time to get back up to speed. because he's not able to keep his conditioning up. It's not like other guys who, you suffer maybe a shoulder injury or a hand injury. Speaking of hand injuries, we'll talk about Calle Jarnkrok in a second, but when you have injuries like that, at least you can get on the ice, you can skate and keep your conditioning up. Marner's not able to do that. So that's something that's going to have to be, they're going to have to take their time and be patient with.
Yeah, the foundation of being a hockey player are skates and how you put them on and how you use them. Yeah, if you can't skate, that's you're starting off really very limited. Marner is a player who hasn't had I don't know, it seems like he hasn't had a really good year, but then you look at the points and you look at the assists and you look at the player himself and what he does. He's he is a player that draws a lot of negativity because of the way he plays, because he's not physical. Most hockey fans love physicality, so he's not very physical. But right now, I think you pointed out the reasons why his absence can be an issue for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And right now, they need key goals to be scored. The last game that they played, of course, 4-2 lead. They needed somebody to maybe get that fifth goal. And he can help you get that. Not necessarily him, but, we know what he can do with Austin Matthews. And his absence there could have made a difference. One goal could have made a difference in that game, which it actually did. So, yeah, he's missed by the Leafs.
He is definitely missed. Calle Jarnkrok has also been missed. His defensive presence is something the Leafs always usually count on when a line is struggling. Defensively, you throw Calle Jarnkrok up there. The latest update is that he has officially been moved to LTIR, which, look, we were expecting him to be out week to week, but this gives you a more defined timeline of how long to expect him to be out. The earliest he will be able to return is April 8th. So we're talking late in the season here. The regular season, for those who don't know, the regular season ends on April 17th. So the good thing here is he could, if all goes well, again, we hope that the injury that he has can be healed by then. That would give him exactly 5 games left to get himself ramped back up going into the playoffs. So I think that's a very important distinction there for Jarnkrok. And what it also does is allows for the team to move things around salary-wise. Connor Timmins, if they decide they want to play him, they don't have to worry about making his salary work, sending anybody down to fit him in. Also, another player who is doubtful to play, I don't think he actually even flew with the team, and that was Ilya Lyubushkin. He did not practice. He is out with an illness, and he's doubtful to play. And look, when the Leafs are expecting Simon Benoit to be back in the lineup, and it changes the way that the whole lineup actually shakes out, because with Lyubushkin out, you wonder who is going to now be on the right side with Morgan Rielly. Lo and behold, it's TJ Brodie going back. I think that's just, familiarity there. And we know TJ Brodie has played the right side. Is it preferred? No. But what it also means is we get a return of the Simon Benoit, Jake McCabe pairing. I actually think that's something that this Leafs team has needed. Simon Benoit, rightfully or wrongfully, I don't think he should have been taken out of the lineup, but who do you take out of the lineup when you add, the right shot of Lyubushkin, you add Edmondson to play with Liljegren? Simon Benoit, unfortunately, was the odd man out. Now he's back in, and this is an opportunity for him to say, I want to stay in this lineup.
Well, that's why the Jarnkrok injury is important, because now Keith the chemist gets to do some work, check some stuff out, see what pairings look okay. You and I both know that they've tested the 7 defenseman unit, and this is an opportunity for them to do that. But the reason they won't do it is because a guy who eats up a lot of ice time, and Marner, is not in the lineup.
Yeah, exactly, right. And one thing I have thought about, the one here, and I'm going to be very careful with the saying of how I would say this. We know that TJ Brodie hasn't had the best of seasons, right?
No, he hasn't.
Is this an opportunity here where Simon Benoit can maybe stake his claim to staying with Jake McCabe? And you see, now I'm not saying TJ Brodie doesn't play ever again, but maybe you see TJ Brodie get a bit of a rest.
Oh, absolutely. And as an older player, we know that the Leafs and Keefe have tried doing this with other players, every year, because this is, again, like we talked about at the beginning of the season, the important thing for the Maple Leafs is to get themselves in a playoff position, not struggle to make it in the final weeks. They're in no man's land right now, too far behind Boston and far enough ahead of Tampa Bay that they've got some wiggle room there where they can ice some lineups that are experimental as opposed to desperate, right? So this is one of the advantages of having a team that grabs some points early in the season, in the middle of the season, so that you can make these kinds of experiments. And believe me, they're very important, especially when you consider they brought in 3 new defensemen. And to your point, there are defensemen that they have to sit that I agree with you. I'd rather not see sit. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that Simon Benoit could end up being the guy on the left side, and TJ Brody could be a guy who gets some rest out of the lineup. And the chemistry experiment, I think, is going to be full on, especially if and when Marner comes back.
Exactly. Like, you're going to see this team give guys days off between now and the end of the season. It just makes sense, especially if they get closer to solidifying where exactly in the seeding they're going to be. Good chance it's going to be third, because I don't know how much movement we're going to be able to see between now and the end of the year. Final kind of news for today, and it was one that I guess was coming when Wayne Simmonds kind of noted that he had kind of been moving on from his opportunity of playing in the NHL, but hadn't officially announced his retirement. And now he is actually going to announce his retirement. The Philadelphia Flyers announced that he's going to be signing a 1-day contract, and they'll be celebrating his career on Saturday. Maybe a little, I wouldn't say sad, but I wish he had the opportunity to do it with the Leafs in town. It kind of, I think, would have worked coincidentally. 2 teams that Simmonds did play for, they could have done it that way. But he is going to retire as a Flyer. He played 1,037 games, played with Philly, the LA Kings, Predators, Devils, Sabres, and Leafs. I always forget that he was with the Predators at one point. But this is a player who obviously, had to balance the fine line of being, at one point, a very skilled player, putting up goals, having to embrace then a 4th-line role, mentor, enforcer, however you want to label that type of player. I kudos to Wayne Simmonds on a great career, and obviously I'm sure he wished he would have won a cup when he was in Toronto, when he was it looked like maybe his career was going in a different direction, but he wasn't able to get that, unfortunately, and wasn't able to get that cup with LA either, because they traded him just before all that kind of came about.
Yeah, a great player, a player who was great at his best. He was a front net presence. He was a guy who would stand up for his teammates. He's very physical, and he could drop his gloves. And he was an honest player, and his career was never about. He was never a guy in Toronto that complained about his role. He played the role that his coach wanted him to play. And I think that's why it's important, and it's great that Philly's getting a chance to salute his career. And it's well-deserved on his part. And he was a lot of fun to watch.
He was definitely a lot of fun to watch, especially in Toronto. He brought, again, one of those few guys that brought that, toughness, physicality. And he also, would chip in offensively too. He wasn't the 30-goal scorer he was during his time in Philadelphia, but he was able to contribute in many other ways. So we'll hopefully Wayne Simmonds will be around the game and continue to be around the game in some other capacity. We're now going to shift our focus into maybe the not so fun stuff, and that is the GM meetings happening in Florida. We're going to go over kind of the big topic being discussed by the GMs right now and what it could mean going forward. This is the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. We are almost getting into the final stretch here of the season, and I'm sure most Leafs fans are going to be hoping that this team can find their stride heading into the playoffs. Regardless of where the Leafs are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your bet in daily fantasy hockey contests. What players would you like to take this week to win 100 times your money? Maybe you want to get Austin Matthews. Maybe you want to get Tyler Bertuzzi. Maybe another big night in Philadelphia. And don't forget, with Sleeper, you can play daily fantasy, NFL, NBA, MLB, college football, all on Sleeper. All you have to do is pick whether studs like. You got McDavid, Crosby, Ovechkin, Matthews. We'll record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times, your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Leafs fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms for use and details and locational availability. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti here, joined by candidate Frank Stanisci, a good friend of mine, friend of the show. He has joined me with Mike, not here this week as he always is willing to. So I'm very happy, Frank, about that. And unfortunately, now we're going to talk about stuff that maybe doesn't always interest people, and that is the NHL GM meetings. Not one that has a lot of spicy topics to talk about. These GM meetings kind of can get very dull, but everyone, all the media, national media is there to cover what exactly is going on in these proceedings. And today, the big topic of discussion was, as usually it is almost every year, video review and whether we need more of it. So the big topic is whether coaches should have the ability to challenge more calls, more plays with video review, because there are obviously things that coaches cannot review. The question here, though, Frank, is it too much? Is it too little? Or is it just right?
As it stands right now, I think we do brace ourselves, right? Whenever the referee heads towards center ice and then goes to the penalty box, here we go again. A lot of hockey fans have that attitude, that they don't like the interference, not the interference penalties, but the interference of the referees into the flow of the game. So whatever they decide to do, it has to be done in a way that it's less impactful on the game. And the NHL has done a pretty good job with, not making it an adventure whenever there's a call. Usually, thank goodness, now we've got video review coaches who very quickly decide there's a problem and they point it out, and the league has been a little efficient. And a clue to that is for them to introduce more video review. That means they're 100% happy with the video review as it stands. So they have some money in the bank they can use up here and introduce something that's important to the game. Do I know what's important to the game as far as changes are concerned? There are some calls that are made, but there's too many of them to list them here today. So it'll be interesting to find out from the league's perspective which new video review they want to introduce. I don't have any hints. Do you have any hints on what they're looking at?
Not anything really specific. I mean, when you look at the current video review, offside has always become such a highly debated one, because sometimes you're talking about millimeters of a play, something that, through the human eye would be tough to go through. You're talking about, plays that you have an offside, but then 2 minutes later they score, it doesn't directly lead to goal. Does that kind of take away from why offside was even brought into in the first place? There was an overturned goal. The big one, I think, was there was an overturned goal where I think it was Hyman had a goal reversed because of an offside play. It's so tough because you always want to be correct. It's tough to always, make that correct, right? But I think the big one here that they were talking about, puck over the glass penalties, right? Because that's not one that gets reviewed. It's the refs that have to make that determination.
Right.
For me, it's like if the refs, my big one here is if the refs have to get together and review it together and discuss it and make it sometimes just a guess. That's what it seems like. Why not just pull out a tablet, see it. It's very easy to pull these things up. They have guys in the arena that are watching these reviews as they happen on plays like this. That's that. So I think like something like that, something that requires a whistle and a moment to think about it, just get it reviewed. Right.
Yeah.
So
it's like what they do with the offside goal. The league's already looking at it after the goal scored. And the question is, how many ways do they want to look at a goal? Okay, they've done that. And now you've got a situation, to your point, where the objectivity is now needs to be replaced by factual stuff. And the over the glass penalty, if it's not a good one, that's a bad penalty to end up being scored on, right? It's like why they reviewed the injuries when there's a cross check or a high stick to make sure that the high stick and the penalty match, or the cross check and the ultimate penalty match. Because what happened in a playoff game, there was an accident that happened. I call it an accident because they thought it was a penalty, but it wasn't. It was an accident and something that was basically self-inflicted, and it caused a loss in a playoff game. The integrity of the game, whatever it takes to raise the integrity of the game, that's the temptation, but doesn't interfere with the flow of the game. Those are the two challenges.
Yeah, I think the puck over glass one, that's like, how many times have we seen a coach look down on the bench, look down at a video screen that he can review, and scream at the refs? You know what? You look at it, you see something's wrong, hey, we're challenging. Doesn't take that long, really. They've gotten a lot better at that. There's also been a lot of talk about face-offs and how players kind of cheat on the face-offs. We know that that's always a topic of conversation because players being thrown out constantly. Some refs like to be over dramatic about the face-offs and things like that. So there's little things like that. I think the big one here is, if you're going to do changes to video review, don't interrupt the flow of the game if you don't have to. But if you're going to be stopping the game to discuss a call, just review it. I think that really should be the policy for the refs. Up to the refs' decision. If you look at the NFL right now with their review, sometimes it comes up from the booth. The booth asks for a review. It's not always the teams that ask for it, right?
Right.
I think NBA does that sometimes too, where they have to review a foul. If a foul is actually called one way or should it be called the other way. So get the call right, but if you can do it in a way that doesn't impact the flow of the game, I'm all for it.
Essentially, I guess I'll word it by saying this, is that what they should be, the video review, and the people in the stands who are looking at the video of the game, they should be in support of the officials at all times. It should be a full-time job, so that if and when a question's asked, they're already looking at the answer. As the question's raised, they're looking at the answer. To your point, I think the point you were making, and that, in my mind, helps with the flow of the game for a couple of reasons. If you arrive at the right conclusion immediately, right, it raises the integrity of the game and doesn't cause any real delay in the game, in the flow of the game. It's these ones that you were referring to, the ones, the calls that in real time aren't a penalty, but then you slow it down to the slowest speed you can make, and then it looks like a totally different call. I think a lot of fans don't like that. It should look like a penalty. It should be a penalty. If it doesn't look like a penalty, it isn't a penalty. And as far as penalties are concerned, my beef is the way they award suspensions. I believe they should work on the consistency of the calls. They're very inconsistent, and that's not something that takes up time, because that's stuff that's determined post game.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to discuss that meetings. We'll see what night 2 or day 2 of the meetings will bring upon that, because I know the GMs definitely want a little more consistency in all of that. We'll now shift their gears to the action happening on the ice. Leafs are back in Philadelphia. Will it be revenge for Flyers this time? We'll discuss that here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is also brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. The offer is good through April 30. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker dealer. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your team every day. David Morassutti here, joined with me, my good friend, candidate Frank Stanisci, who also does a lot of his work on Candid Frank Live. You can see him on his YouTube channel, also on Spanglish World Network, if you ever want to go and check out his stuff and you want more Candid Frank. Because I know some of you guys always want more Candid Frank. He is always a busy man. Almost 5 days a week, you have a show in some way, shape, or form. So a lot of ways you can get more content from Frank. We will have some content tonight from the Leafs. They are back in Philadelphia. They're taking on the Flyers. A little different this time because John Tortorella will be behind the bench this time around. I also wonder if the Leafs had done what they did in the last game that got the Flyers so worked up about setting their power play late, would John Tortorella have gone after Sheldon Keefe, made such a stink about it, like the coaching staff of the Flyers did last week?
It's a motivation that he always goes for. You know, he's always on the edge. We all know that Torts is a guy who resides on the edge of keeping the team on its edge, keeping the opposition on its edge. That's where he lives, and that's basically where he plays from. And you know what? They need a guy like that at least early. The right now, Philly this year had a really good start to their season, and they've stumbled a little bit to the point where, these games that they're playing against the Leafs and everybody else at this point are very important to him and the team. So the Leafs are going to be in tough. Revenge, is going to be part of it. That late power play is going to be a motivator. But the one thing the Leafs have to do is they have to get their stuff together. Their defensive game, they need to get that going. Their defensemen that they brought in need to partner well. But right now, we've got some injuries, as we talked earlier, so there's going to be some experimentation. So there's going to be some interesting situations. I'm looking forward to it because I really think, to your point, the physicality that the Leafs can bring now, they're out-hitting their opponents now more regularly. So they're becoming more of a physical team. So that's a bit of an adjustment as well. And now they have to work that in, because the biggest problem with being physical, you're taking yourself sometimes out of position, which could create, and pun intended, make your team not as locked on as they should be to winning a game when they're ahead 4-2.
Well, I guess that's something we can locked onto tonight is how do the Leafs kind of work with that Flyers physicality. They didn't back down from it in the last game. Ryan Reeves was not in the lineup against the Hurricanes. Kind of expected because the Hurricanes do not play that style that suits Reeves, so you were able to take him out, and now you're getting a more physical Flyers team, so Reeves will draw back into the lineup for that. The thing about the Flyers is they were the talk of the league this year in terms of being a surprise team. We all thought they're tearing it down. They're going for a rebuild. They were, within the top three of the Metro Division, and they still are. It's just they're not as comfortable in that number 3 position. They have 76 points on the year. Big discrepancy between that. You want to talk about a big gap. The Flyers are 14 points behind Carolina for second place in the Metro Division. So pretty much Carolina and New York have locked in that 1 and 2 seed in the Metro Division. Now that number 3 spot definitely up for grabs, because you look at the teams chasing the Flyers, one of them being the Washington Capitals. And if you haven't watched, the Washington Capitals absolutely took care of business, or were taking care of business against the Capitals. We're kind of watching. The Capitals are playing right now in Calgary. and they are winning 4-2. So we'll see if they hold on to win that game. If they do win that game, they are 1 point behind Philadelphia, and they'll have a game in hand because they have 66 games. They'll be at 67 games. The New York Islanders, who also have a game in hand, are 3 points behind the Flyers. This is a wrong time for Philly to be on a bit of a down streak. They're 4-5-1 in their last 10 games. They're on a 2-game losing streak. So Torts, I think, is going to be a little bit more intense with this group now that he is back on the bench. They lost both games with their coach sidelined. This is the Leafs got to be careful here tonight. This is going to be a Flyers team that's got revenge on their minds, but also playing for their playoff lives.
Absolutely. They have something to play for, and you're right about the way they're going to come at this, and the Leafs are going to run into a bit of a physical presence by Philadelphia. The most important thing that the Leafs have to do when they go in there, and this is something that happens all the time, especially in this situation, the first 5-8 minutes of the game are going to be important for the Leafs on the road. If they can keep the lead, get the lead early, and then, of course, they'll get another opportunity to prove that they can bring a lead home. That's the other thing that they're going to have to do. So I think that's what Keefe and the organization needs to establish, that this Leaf team can score early and hold the lead. And that's going to be the big thing that they have to do. And they're going to have to do it without Marner again. We talked about how important Marner is, and that is an issue for them. You know, they need that big goal. Marner's not there to help them. And defensively, when it comes to penalty killing, Marner's not there for them. So, you know, I hate to repeat what we talked about earlier, but it is impactful in this game specifically against the Flyers.
2 other things I think we should be locked in on tonight. The special teams have been more in the focus and they should be more in the focus, specifically the penalty kill. It has not been very good. The Leafs, I can't remember the last time the Leafs had a game where they did not allow a goal shorthanded. That needs to change. You know, in a game like this where things can get a little chippy, you might take an undisciplined penalty. The Leafs penalty kill is going to have to really be stingy. But not just that, if they do get the power play opportunities, we know the Flyers love those shorthanded chances. And we know that this Leafs team, especially on the power play, not always so ready for those aggressive penalty killers.
Yeah. And you know what, with the war now, or Dewar, you know, the Leafs go to war now with, never mind. You know, his penalty killing is going to help the Leafs. Especially with Marner gone, and yeah, they're going to need some. You know, with guys like Nylander, a little offense on penalty killing helps in the long term as far as penalty killing is concerned, because the league pays attention to that, the other teams and the team you're playing that night. Which, you know, it takes the edge off the offense and the penalty power play of the opposition. So that's going to be a key for them as well.
Yeah. Final one here for me, I'm kind of locked in on who starts in goal. I don't think we got a starter announced by Sheldon Keefe. You go with Samsonov, or do you bring Joseph Woll in? What do you make of that?
Well, I would say automatically they should go with Joseph Woll. The reason they go with Joseph Woll, it's too early, I think, for a goalie to take the net and run with it. I think we're still at the point where Joseph Woll just came back from an injury. You know, he needs the time between the pipes. He needs to get back into a rhythm. You know, when he left, you know, he was on a roll. He got hurt and he was gone for a very long time. So I think he needs the net for the long-term good of the Maple Leaf team.
Yeah, I mean, he's been off for a bit too, right? And Sheldon Keefe doesn't like team goalies sitting obviously back-to-back. They're both going to play. It's just a matter of who gets the first one. Sometimes you read things one way and the other. Be interesting to see. Samsonov has gone a few consecutive starts here, so maybe you just give him the night off. You don't even need to dress him. You might even decide put Martin Jones in as the backup, let Samsonov have the night off, and get ready for his return trip to Washington. So we'll keep an eye on that. We will discuss how the game goes on the next episode here of the Locked On Leafs podcast. And I also want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, you can mark a calendar for March 20th, 7 p.m. for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. So that's on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you're a Jays fan, go and take a look there. If you just are a big MLB fan, go and take a look. You can go on the YouTube channel Locked On Sports. Also, you can get it for free on Amazon Fire on the Amazon Fire TV channel apps as well. But on the next episode, we will go over the Leafs game against the Flyers. We'll also preview the back-to-back against the Capitals. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast from, and follow the show at Locked On Leafs on X. And you can also follow our good guest here, Candid Frank Stanisci, at Candid Frank Live on X. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.